are we really at the point now where we might have to like have a conversation about firing Mike Budenholzer after this?
I'm not
I
there. I think a lot of fans will be, but to me, this just comes down a lot more to what the roster is. Like, I know it's easy to point at, and this is not me, trying to be unfair to you, but I think like because I see where you're coming from totally, but also I think they're not in this position if the roster's better. Like they shouldn't be in this position, and I think like part of it, yes, Giannis getting hurt had an impact, um, but I do think this speaks at large to what the roster is rather than how Mike coached the series. Even if I agree that he didn't coach well.
So my problem is, I think you have to do something now.
Yeah.
And like you have to make a change in some way. Chris Middleton has, I believe, something like a $43 million player option. I'll pull that up as I'm talking, but something like a $43 million player option. He might just opt into that. Like after the way he played this this playoff run and up until today at the very least, and throughout the latter portion of the season, he was pretty good. He wasn't quite a $43 million player. I would imagine that there's a real chance he opts into that or opts out and goes for like a longer extension with Milwaukee. But if you're Milwaukee, do you want to sign Chris Middleton to a longer extension? Like if he does 3 years, 95 million, are you comfortable with that, Mark?
I don't know. Something I need to think through because, like you
Yeah.
mentioned, I think he was okay defensively today. But his defense, I mean, he was okay offensively today, but his defense just as a whole, the series was rough. And I think
Quite poor.
when you're looking at, what that drop off has been this season compared to, is he getting back to the same level offensively that he was a year or two ago? That has me questioning it quite a bit. Because I think even when you were looking at when he was a borderline all defense guy, on top of being, a guy who's giving you like 20 to 23 a game on really good efficiency with some secondary playmaking, like I think even then I'm like, is that somebody I want to pay $30 to $40 million a year or give a max contract to? Like, I think I would lean yes on that. But again, like we're still talking about like, okay, well, this guy's probably 15 to 20, somewhere between 15 and 25. Right now, like this version of Chris Middleton's like a top 50 player. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to figure out there. And on top of that too, Brook Lopez is a free agent after next season. So but to me, Brook's been their second best player all year, like without question. But he's what, 34? So
and for what it's worth, Brook Lopez is a free agent this season, not next season.
That's this season. Shit. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So they have a real decision to make here in terms of, do you trust 35-year-old Brook Lopez, who is enormous, to continue to age this well and continue to hold up? Because as soon as Brook's defense drops off as a rim protector a little bit, it's going to go. Like, yeah, his value is really, really going to drop. But do you trust him to be able to have like a Marc Gasol kind of value long-term? He's not quite the passer and processor and playmaker that Marc Gasol was able to be later in his career. That's just not who Brook is. And Brook, I thought, kept them in the game in the second quarter with incredible shot making. He made a 3 from the right wing. He had those 2 Dirk fadeaways in the middle of the paint that were huge. He had 10 points in that second quarter. But I don't know, man. I think it's hard. Zawad Khan in the YouTube comments here asks, if you're the Bucks front office, where do you go here roster construction wise? They're old as shit. And if Milton picks his option up, no cap flexibility for the foreseeable future. If you look at what their cap flexibility is, let's say Middleton picks up the option. It's for $41 million. You have Giannis, you have Drew Holiday, you have Bobby Portis, you have Pat Connaughton under contract for all of that time. That doesn't quite cap you out. You're in a place where if you decide not to retain Brook Lopez, you could actually get some flexibility after next season. But I don't think that you can really get rid of Brook Lopez at this point. Like if you lose Brook Lopez for nothing, you're taking an enormous step back. next
Yeah.
season. There's just not another way around that. So you can't lose him for nothing, which means you have to actually bring in a salary slot. I think they just kind of have to run it back, right? That feels like what you have to do roster wise.
I think yes and no. I think I would say yes to Brook. Like maybe you're looking at more of a midterm deal, but also I think that's hard to sell to somebody who is 34. Like I think Brook does have a chance to have another pretty significant payday. Not like I think he's making a max, but I think like with how well he's played now, like I think that there will be a team or two that would be willing to offer him pretty big money. So I'm interested to see what that looks like. But I think I'm at the stage of like, do we try and trade Chris Middleton and stuff to get
Yeah.
different looks? Because I think that that's kind of where I'd be at here. Again, I'd need to reassess stuff with medical staff and try and really parse through what those options actually are. But yeah, it's not great.
So here's the other real question. As Miles Johnson brings up here in the YouTube comments, can we speak about Drew having a 49 true shooting percentage in the playoffs since he got traded to Milwaukee? Drew is a great defensive player. Drew is also a guy that has really struggled in the playoffs since he's been in Milwaukee. Even during their run, it was very hot or cold. It was very hot or cold when they won the title with Drew.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. But also I think it kind of goes hand in hand a little bit. Like they don't win the title without him having the one or two hot nights. And I think that's kind of what you knew that trading for him, what he was like. I think he's always kind of had that streakiness, which is part of what's held him back from being a consistent all-star, all-NBA guy. And I think, again, like when we're talking about how they play defensively and his offense is that much more important because of how lacking their offense had been so much of this season. So I think there were some loud, not great moments in the playoffs, but I think part of that is just where he is in the hierarchy and how they are kind of set up right now.
Yeah. It's interesting because I felt like the fourth quarter. So we need to mention this as well. We mentioned it at the top, but the Milwaukee Bucks blew a 16-point lead going into the fourth quarter here. I don't think we've mentioned that enough here in this conversation. It was a disaster. And I felt like it was a disaster because Drew was not on the floor, frankly, for that time. And Giannis went full Giannis and tried to freight train over everybody. And it's really hard to do that against Miami because they have a bunch of strong dudes that can just throw their body in front of the play. It's hard because if you want to make real changes, if Middleton opts in, but it's hard because does Chris Middleton opt out if you're threatening to move him, or because that's a guy that you really should be having a real conversation with, right? You don't just move that guy. He was the second best player or third best player on a title team for you, right? Mm-hmm. And he has real organizational, value to you. He's been around forever. He's a legend of your entire organization long term. He's going to get his jersey retired in Milwaukee. You can't let that guy opt in and then trade him. That's a fucking disaster look for the organization, I think, which to me then brings up Drew. But again, if you're going to then re-sign Brook and play your drop coverage scheme, you actually need Drew to be the best, chaser of guards over screens and be the best on-ball defensive guard in the NBA. You need to retain him then, which is why, again, I'm just do you run this back with a different coach and see what happens? And I don't know if there's a great answer here for Milwaukee. That's the problem. I look into moving Chris Middleton while having a very open conversation with him saying look, you're on $40 million next year. You're not going to get $40 million on the open market. We're happy to move you elsewhere. But we do, if, we would like to let you opt into that deal and get your payday and move you elsewhere. And then you can be a free agent and try and get your money else. If you don't like it for a year, you can be a free agent. I feel like that's an interesting strategy for them. I think exploring a Drew Holiday trade is an interesting strategy for them. I think you have to retain Brook. I think that is a place where I do come down on it. You have to retain Brook Lopez for at least next season. But the other part of this that gets really interesting, Mark, is the new collective bargaining agreement. Because in the new collective bargaining agreement, if you re-sign Brook, you're definitely flying over the apron, the second tax apron, right? And if you do that, you are then substantially limited in terms of your trade flexibility. So some of the rumors that have come out about the new CBA is that if you're over that second apron, you can't aggregate players in trades. If you're over that second apron, you can't take on more money in trades than you send out. So you're then basically locked into this roster again for another year. And that feels problematic to me. This isn't a situation with easy answers. I think the answer is you probably just have to run it back and pray. You're also not going to have a mid-level exception this offseason if you re-sign Brook, because you don't get the mini mid-level anymore if you're over that second apron. So you probably get worse this offseason. This is a very hard situation for Milwaukee.
Well, yeah, and I think the biggest thing to me too is like you can't afford to take a step back next year. Like this, Giannis is a free agent in what, 2025?
Yeah.
So yeah, they're in a weird spot.
Yeah. The last point here for Milwaukee I want to bring up before we get into Jimmy is Giannis. I thought Giannis was a problem for them in the first part of this fourth quarter. I thought he just went, like I said, freight train mode and tried to draw fouls and tried to not really run all that efficient offense. They kind of broke the scheme, it felt like, in that quarter. And then late in the game, it was clear he didn't want to go to the foul line. Like, he went, what was it? I know at one point he was like 10 of 21.
15 of 23 tonight or something like that. It was less than that. I'm trying to.
Yeah. He was 10 of 23 from the foul line tonight. So, I think we need to like have a real conversation about Giannis's foul shooting. This is a real problem for Giannis moving forward. And this is a real thing he needs to improve. This is now threatening his status as being the best player in the world. And I think there's a real case that if like Kevin Durant leads the Suns to the title, I think that Kevin Durant has a very real case as being the best player in the world again. If X, Y, and Z, this is now an open discussion in a pretty real way. Joel Embiid leads the Sixers to a title. Real case as best player in the world. Giannis had the title, I felt like, for about a year and a half now. Ever since they won the title, maybe 2 years. I don't know if he has the title if he doesn't improve as a foul shooter, even though he played this series with a back injury. And I think that's important to note.
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's something I need to think more about on. Like, I don't think I have a concrete take right now. Like it definitely was not his best series, but yeah, it was, that's one I need to parse through more in my head again.